Ave Maria mutual funds, seeking the moral high ground for 20 years. Pro-life, pro-family, and Catholic values have guided us to the top.
St. Alphonsus, he says, a priest gives greater honor to God than all the angels and saints and the Blessed Virgin Mary that they've ever given, because their worship cannot be of infinite value. He's talking about the sacrifice of the Mass.
Hey, my friends, you know what I love? I love it when authors, professors, or writers are really generous by taking a complex topic, summarizing it, and giving us the jewels out of all of their hard labor, their research. And we've got a new book out on St. Alphonsus de Ligouri, who has very, very extensive writings, except that we get to boil it down to the jewels. And it's done by none other than Stephen Cox, LifeSite News' own writer. And he's put out a book called St. Alphonsus for the 21st Century, which I'm sure you're going to love. We're going to talk about it here on the John Henry Weston Show. Stay tuned. Stephen Cox, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, John Henry. It's great to be here.
Let's begin as we always do with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Stephen, maybe we can start with why St. Alphonsus Ligouri? Why did you start this book?
Yeah, so I would like to say that I chose St. Alphonsus, but I think more or less he chose me. 10 years ago, when I was in my late 20s, I just happened by chance to, I was living with a friend of mine at the time. We were former college friends, and he moved back into town. And just one night we were chatting in the living room, and there was a stack of books. I said, "What are all those?" Because they was a foot tall. And I said, "Where did you get those?" And he said, "Oh, I just found them at some bookstore or something." And we were talking about spiritual topics, and I just opened it up, and it was St. Alphonsus, and it was all of his old books from the 1800s when they were printed. He actually lived in 1696, lived till 1780s, but the books I had obtained were just so powerful, and I was reading them, and the quotations that St. Alphonsus was using, I mean, he was quoting from church fathers, from almost every book of the Bible, and I, within 10 minutes, just was so blown away by it. I said, "Where has this been my entire life? I mean, why don't priests preach like this anymore? Why don't we hear this from the popes, for that matter? Just the sound grasp of the traditions of the church." And so over time, it just became a desire to really reach those family and friends who I had been trying to, make more aware of the issues going on in the church, as well as this basic spirituality. And I wasn't having great success. And so I said, I saw what St. Alphonsus did for me in my own spiritual life and just understanding of our faith. And so I said, this has to be more well known. And so I think just providentially, using my God-given talents, and all praise to God for anything good this book does, it just kind of happened that way. And so here it is, finally, 10 years later, after a long journey.
Beautiful. What did you really hope to convey in here? I see it has a lot of prayers of St. Alphonsus that are usually not found. Where did you get those from? And what do you think will be the takeaway for most people?
Yeah, so a lot of the prayers that he has are in just the various writings that he's had published. But everywhere I was reading, they were not in any one single space. So it was a challenge to find all of those, gather them together, and present them in one place for people who want to read them all in this spot. I think to backtrack a bit, I think you have to go back to the founding of the Redemptorist Order by St. Alphonsus. And he was one of 8 children. 2 of his brothers entered religious life. 2 of his sisters entered religious life. And he was he didn't become a priest. He didn't enter the seminary until he was 27. A very successful lawyer. His father was grooming him into that career, and he was very successful at it. And so he was among the nobility in Naples at the time, again, the 1700s. And his career was on that trajectory. His father wanted him to be married, arranged for him to be married. But he gave that all up after losing a court case, a very profound and very important court case. And so to understand, I think the parallels is St. Alphonsus gave all that up to go and found the Congregation for the Most Holy Redeemer to preach to the peasants in the Italian countryside, basically. People laughed at him for doing that, for giving up his fame and his career. And, I look back at that, and St. Alphonsus gave that all up to preach to the most abandoned souls. That's the motto of the Redemptorists. And you look around today, where are we at in the church's history? We are so far away from the church's traditions. We're abandoned by our flock, our shepherds, and so there's a parallel there, I think, to be said, and that's why I think St. Alphonsus needs to be understood again today, and primarily I think about what he says about the priesthood. So we'll probably get into that in just a moment, but that I think will probably be the biggest takeaway is St. Alphonsus' teachings on the priesthood, on religious life, seminarians, and there's also a section in the book about women religious. And so it's for everybody, really, this book, for everyone at different stages in their lives.
So what is it about the priesthood that he says that's so striking today that makes it seem like we are, where we need to head in his direction, or back in his direction, if you will?
Right. Well, I mean, growing up, I went to Catholic grade school, high school, even college, and for grad school. And the thing you often hear is the church today rails against clericalism, this undue power of just obeying whatever the priest or the bishop says, and that's it. And today there's sort of an improper exaltation of the laity when it comes to the church's divine mission. But St. Alphonsus reiterates, and I'll give you a direct quote. He says, "A priest gives greater honor to God than all the angels and saints and the Blessed Virgin Mary that they've ever given, because their worship cannot be of infinite value." And he's talking about the sacrifice of the Mass. And he goes on, "The power of the priest surpasses that of the Blessed Virgin because she cannot absolve even one sin." Okay. And so when I first understood that, I mean, that is something that St. Alphonsus says, confession frees the soul from the claws of the devil, from the snares of hell. And when a priest does that, that's something Mary could not do, the angels cannot do. And that understanding of the priesthood, as well as what St. Alphonsus says about when the priest says the words at the consecration in Mass, God himself obeys him. He will descend to the altar at Mass. And so the priest must be pure. The priest must deny himself in all sorts of ways, his tastes, his preferences, and live only to pleasing God. I think when you hear about that, and when you really read it in the book, when it presents itself, you think about, what's the state of the clergy today? What is the state of the church today? I mean, priests don't wear their cassocks, something St. Alphonsus says priests should be doing at all times. Priests should be ignoring, here's another quote, his own conveniences, his interests, and amusements. I mean, really what it gets down to is we have to have a proper hierarchical understanding, not an egalitarian, flattened sort of synodal church. We have to have that proper understanding of the priesthood, what they do, and their power, and priests have to understand that too. There's a quote in the book that St. Alphonsus says, "The good morals and the salvation of the people depend on good pastors. If there is a good priest in charge of the parish, you will soon see devotion flourishing and people praying. Hence the proverb, like pastor, like parish." So if there's not, as it is the case today, people are not praying, people are not going to Mass, we're not going to confession. Priests are not even telling people to go to confession before they receive communion. This is all upside down and complete opposite of what St. Alphonsus advised in so many ways.
Listen, dear friends, long gone are the days where you and I could just simply trust what the nightly news broadcasted or consider what we read in the local newspaper as the truth. The mainstream media deceives the world, telling them bold-faced lies and often using fear to scare and control the masses. Now, how many of you are already seeing your friends and family back to grabbing their masks or scheduling another vaccine due to the uptake the media's covering about COVID or something else? Well, we've had enough. We can't let the mainstream media shape our culture and influence our family and friends. We must make sure that the truth is available to all, to remind and warn the world of the lies that are continuing to be spread. So today at LifeSite, we kick off our fall campaign, and I need your help to strengthen LifeSite's voice for truth, to keep LifeSite News fully operational in the United States, Canada, and around the world. We must raise $500,000 by October the 1st. So please pause this video now, pray right now about making a contribution, and then do as you are called to do by the Lord. Thank you for your attention. And now, back to the program. What was it about St. Alphonsus' life that probably touched you the most?
Oh, it's a great question. I think what his leaving the world behind, his success he's been having in the world. Again, he was a civil and canon lawyer. He got his degrees when he was 16. He was raised to be amongst the most high-ranking laymen in the whole entire kingdom. His father was the captain of the royal galleys, so the navy. He was very high-ranking. He was invited to and actually did attend events and celebrations for the Holy Roman Emperor at the time. And he had everything you could want. I mean, his father, again, tried to arrange marriage for him twice. And it was at this famous court case involving the Grand Duke of Tuscany. And it was when he was 26. And he lost the case despite everyone in the kingdom knowing what this case was about. And he had been having so much success. And it was scuttled not through, or he lost the case rather, not through his own negligence, which is something that historians actually suggest or say happened quite a bit. Actually, there's been recent scholarship that discovers that the judge was actually bribed with a pair of bears, of all things, at the time, again, the 1720s, and that a cardinal was involved with some of this, and that the Medici, okay, the very famous Italian Medici family, lawyers were his opponents, and so they became successful. And Alphonsus, when he was decided against, when he was ruled against, an entirely unjust manner. Again, he had, I think, the justice was on his side, and he said, "Courts, I will never see you again. World, I know thee now." And that spoke to me so much about just understanding all his vanity, and it's helped me put into perspective everything in life, in my professional life, and everything else. And so it's like you have to see what the saints are so what they give up oftentimes, but we don't always remember. So that's impacted me the most about his personal life, which I resonate with very much.
So here's something interesting. This guy at 16 was finished his law degree. Now, I don't care what kind of system they had. At 16, that means he was a genius of some sort.
He was given the most prestigious tutors in the entire country. He had relatives who were also clergymen. He was a master harpsichordist, so he knew how to play instruments. He painted. He wrote poems and hymns, as we mentioned earlier. One of his most famous ones is From Starry Skies Thou Fallest. It's still a very famous song in Italy. Andrea Bocelli sings it around Christmas time every year. So look it up. And I've included those in the book. So people who want to learn more about not just the spirituality of St. Alphonsus, but also his understandings on, I mean, he was very much a genius and gifted by God. And again, he gave that all up to become a priest. And he didn't begin writing, really quick, Don Henry, interesting fact here. He didn't start writing, or he didn't publish his first work until he was in his late 40s. Okay. And he lived till 91. So, he wrote over 110 books, pamphlets, treatises on spiritual, moral, doctrinal, Marian, topics. And some of these are not small works. His Glories of Mary is over 600 pages long. And so he was entirely gifted with just a soaring intellect. He is a doctor of the church. It should be made known. So yeah, but he gave it all back to God. That's the beautiful thing of the story is he didn't keep it to himself to make money, to become a famous lawyer. He gave it all back to God, and that's something it's all in the book. So you learn about his private life as well as some of his other pastoral accomplishments.
What I found truly fascinating was that despite his absolutely brilliant intellect, he actually made it his mission to go and talk to the outcasts, to the poor, how would they understand him even?
Well, this is the great thing about St. Alphonsus is that there's a section in the book about preaching. He said, I never gave a sermon that the littlest old lady in the back of the church could not understand. Okay, so he revolutionized preaching at the time. So he never used bombastic speech, high language, something that the laity could not understand, which was actually in vogue at the time, and easily something that someone of his learned stature could have done. I mean, he, again, as you mentioned, he was a genius, and but he made it simple. He met the people where they were, and that attests to his Christ-like nature. I mean, Christ did not use complex language and all sorts of confusing sentences. It was very direct, very simple, straightforward. And St. Alphonsus recommends that for priests today, and I hope they will adopt it very much.
Now, you mentioned about wearing cassocks, and that's a big deal today. A lot of priests, even very good holy priests, they will sometimes, particularly when traveling, let's say, not wear their cassocks because it's they get spit on or it's uncomfortable, it's hot, it's difficult. What did St. Alphonsus say about that?
Well, he understood from the day he was ordained. He actually wrote up a list of bullet points about what his purpose in life is now. And he said, I am a priest. I am greater. He understood that the priesthood itself, okay, not is above the glory of the angels. They can do things the angels cannot. So priests have to live with angelic purity and be role models for everyone at all times. There's no break. You are a priest forever, according to Scripture, even in the next world after we die. The famous saying is the highway to hell is paved with the skulls of bishops and priests, and that's the case for St. Alphonsus. He understood that your entire life from that moment on is a continual sacrifice to God, and the cassock represented that clerical state that you cannot escape. And so he always said, here's several quotes from him. He said, priests must flee from worldly conversations, be quiet and gentle at home. They should be edifying in church. Priests should always guard against everything that can offend their eyes and their ears. Games of amusement are but little suited to a minister of God. He said, modesty in all things, modesty in looks, modesty in gait, modesty in conversation. Okay, so it was a really complete self-denial, of the total denunciation of the will for Alphonsus. He did that when he was made a bishop as well, and later in life at age 66, he offered that up. He did not want to be appointed a bishop in his late 60s. He was very ill in his later years, but he understood that it's a complete crucifixion, and that, I think, is really missing from the priesthood again today. And again, as he said, like pastors, like parish, we're seeing that trickle down to the faithful, and it's very sad. But St. Alphonsus, there's a reason he's a saint. There's a reason he's a doctor of the church, and I think those attest to that fact.
One of the things that he talks about in the book is about religious vocations. What does he say about that? Because we see very little of, other than the priesthood, the religious life today. I still remember trying to find any nun that I could show to my kids, because it was like they were non-existent. Now, mind you, I'm in Canada, and maybe that's a different story elsewhere, but it was a challenge. So what does he say about religious life?
So firstly, he does give advice to parents on this topic, and he actually gives some pretty strong advice. He tells mothers to not let their daughters, especially, be around young men who have strong feelings for them. He tells fathers, especially because he understood that the male is the head of the household, to not allow their children to frequent places of occasions of sin, and to every day pray with their children to end the day with recollection about how the day went, and to encourage their child, if they have the inclination to do so, to religious life. He says sinning against religious vocation, in other words, to deny a child a potential vocation, is a double sin. He says not only is this sin against charity, but also against piety. Okay, by denying the church a potential soul to live in its service. And St. Alphonsus' parents understood this, but his father, not so much. His father definitely wanted him to go into the career. And he even, when Alphonsus told him he wanted to be a priest, he locked him in his room. It was not a good several years. He actually received formation for 3 years, from 27 to 30, living at his parents' house. And it was very sometimes conflict emerged between him and his father, who again later in life accepted his son's vocation. But he says to seminarians to always visit the Blessed Mother, and to pray, so pray the Rosary every day, and to visit Eucharistic adoration. Okay, so these are the two very big things that St. Alphonsus says, especially for laity, but especially to seminarians and priests, is to make frequent visits to Eucharistic adoration as often as possible. He also says to obey your superior unless there's any sort of dramatic sinful command. And he said, always be humble, be willing to be humiliated in your community. And it actually makes the interesting point that in all the communities that there are, religious vocations, even if there's saints among them, God's going to allow some irritation to happen just based on the variety of souls, personality differences, and things like that. But St. Alphonsus says it's for the seminarian's own good that happens, because it keeps them mindful of the fact that heaven is not on earth, that dealing with others and offering that suffering up is part of the priestly life. And to pray always. Prayer is oxygen for the soul. I've read elsewhere. St. Alphonsus agrees with that. And he mentions that entirely in his writings. He says the priest has to devoutly pray his office. And again, the seminarians as well as nuns need to understand to offer all of that up, and to be committed to their vocation, and to say, unless I want to be a saint, don't enter unless you want to be a saint, is what he says. If you don't have that attitude of giving all to God, don't enter. And he says, actually, one last point, John Henry, to the young women. He tells them, married women, he actually advises several of the young women who wrote letters to him. He wrote thousands of letters. His letters are beyond scope. He said, look at married women. They have to deal with husbands, children, in-laws, birthday, all these things. The happiest women on earth are those in the convent. And he says, if more women understood this, every woman would be a nun. And I think that's keen advice for young women today, to consider that. It's such a glorious vocation. And St. Alphonsus encourages both young men and women in his writing. So yeah, he definitely gives great advice to seminarians and those who want to pursue the priesthood.
Hey, my friends, now is the time to stand up and fight. We are just about to have the Synod on Synodality, and everything that you've seen indicates that it's going to be an absolute disaster. We have Father James Martin as a personal appointee of the Pope speaking at it. We've got Cardinal Cupich, Cardinal Tobin. These picks of the Pope to engage in this synod are indicative of where we're going. We're going into heresy. And at these times of great crisis, the church, especially those called in the laity to work for the glory of Christ and his church, are called to gather and strategize. Back in 2014, LifeSite launched something called Rome Life Forum. It was a gathering at that point of some 75 life and family leaders from all around the world to strategize as to what we could do. And when we gathered, the majority of people were most concerned about what? About Pope Francis, about what was going on in Rome. But this was 2014, but the life and family leaders saw it first. Now, a decade on, we are confronted with some of the most severe challenges the church has ever faced. And so our tradition at LifeSite is to continue with Rome Life Forum, which has continued every year until we had to take a break over COVID because we weren't permitted. But we're starting it up again. Please come, if you feel so called, to Rome, October 31st and November 1st, the very end of the Synod on Synodality. And we'll be there to strategize with His Eminence, with His Excellency, and with many life and family leaders from around the world. For LifeSite News, this is John Henry Weston, and may God bless you. Now, he has a big volume on Our Lady called The Glories of Mary. What did you glean from there? What's your takeaway from there?
Yeah, so I could have written an entire chapter on that book alone. I decided to write just 4 subchapters in the last chapter. He clarifies that Mary, the name of Mary, is of divine origin. Okay, it has a name. That name itself is holy, and Mary was created by God. She is, he says, like the moon to the sun, whereas God is the sun, perfect, bright, illuminating. Mary is the moon. She reflects that beauty at night, especially. And he says the soul in sin is in darkness, but he can turn to Mary. He can turn to Mary for hope, for help in getting back to God. And he says we should make Mary our mother because look at the example that Christ gave us. He lived his private life until he was 30 under Mary and Joseph's tutelage, under their obedience. And so he has special remarks for laity, but especially priests too. He says, priests, mother is the Mary of priests. At the cross, Christ said to St. John, behold your mother, the mother of priests, and the mother of all of us as well, St. Alphonsus says. So he also makes the point that at judgment, God is Christ is going to judge us according to justice, right? And Mary will be there to plead with him, to be our intercessor of mercy. She's the Queen of Mercy. So she will be there if we've prayed, again, throughout our lives and put ourselves under her patronage by not sinning. She will be there to be our advocate. And St. Alphonsus most importantly says, though, to be a child of Mary, we have to give up sin. We have to be worthy of her protection by following in the footsteps of her Son, Jesus Christ. So we can't expect Mary to intercede for us during our last hours or when we're judged if we haven't been availing ourselves to her protection. And one thing he personally did, Mary appeared to him on several occasions when he was preaching. One time in Italy, he elevated off the ground one time when he was giving a sermon on her. The laity said his face shone very sparkling. Our Lady of Perpetual Help, she was actually, the icon of her was given to the Redemptorist Order by Pope Blessed Pius IX in the 1800s. So they're the actual protectors of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. St. Alphonsus fasted on Saturdays throughout his whole life. He wore chains around his neck to make eating an act of mortification. He sprinkled bitter herbs on his food. And he always instructed his priests to give sermons on Mary. And he always said those were some of the most edifying sermons the priests ever gave. So he was very devoted to the Blessed Mother and encouraged great devotion to her. Beautiful.
Want to get to, before we close, where can we get the book and where can we follow what you're doing?
Yeah, so St. Alphonsus for the 21st Century, if you just type that into Amazon, it's published through there. And one thing to mention is that Archbishop Vigano has lent his endorsement to the book. So I'm very gracious to him. Father Alphonsus Maria, he's a Redemptorist priest, a traditional Redemptorist priest who preaches missions. He's endorsed the book as well. And so I'm very grateful to them, as well as the typesetter, Kenneth Lieblich, Michael Schrauser did the cover, and I have to mention my friend Alex Barbas. They helped so much with this book. So thank you for them. You can obviously find the book on Amazon, like I said. You can follow my work on Twitter at Stephen Cox, and obviously here at LifeSite News, where we're doing so many great things. And thank you again for Jen Henry for having me on and being able to bring St. Alphonsus to our readers and the church in this world. Again, I think his main message, I think hopefully everybody, again, can buy the book. You're going to find different things that come out at you at this book. You know, if you're a fallen away Catholic, you don't know how to pray, you're going to understand his writings on prayer. And it's really going to help you pray more. If you're, a college student pursuing or thinking about a vocation, there's something in there for you. There's something for parents and so many others. So I think that's what God wants in this time, is for those principles to come back and to really help the church.
Beautiful. Stephen, thank you for the great work that you've done. God bless you. And God bless all of you. We'll see you next time. Hi, everyone. This is John Henry Weston. We hope you enjoyed this program. To see more like it, be sure to hit the subscribe button below to get all the latest content from LifeSite News. Check the links in the description to read more and connect with us on social media so that you can stay up to date with all the latest life, family, faith, and freedom news. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.